One of the most nervous aspects of the cast coming together was the fact that they'd never met each other before. That, you know, we'd gone around the world and we'd picked the best people for each of the roles individually, met them, auditioned them, whatever, offered them the role, they'd accepted the role. We were happy, but the unknown thing was that none of them had worked together before. Most of them had never even met each other before. So there was a very nervous moment when suddenly we're in New Zealand 6 weeks out from the shoot and everybody starts getting off the plane.
When I was getting ready to go out, they said, when you get to Heathrow, you'll be travelling with someone called Orlando Bloom.
I just left my family behind and my friends and my life, and I was like feeling a little bit teary, you know, at the idea of leaving everything behind and my dog and everything.
And I see this guy, you know, and I thought, he looks elf-like.
And this wee fella walked over and he said,
"You wouldn't be Orlando Bloom, would you?" He said, "Billy!"
And I was like, oh my God, you're a hobbit. And we just had this huge embrace.
And it was my birthday as well. I'd just turned 30 that day. So we had champagne on the flight. And then when we got to LA, because of the time difference, it was my birthday again. So we had more champagne, you know, because it's the 28th again.
Pete had done something very intelligent, whereby at the start of filming it was the four hobbits for about 2 months, primarily just us, no one else.
And I really hoped that those four guys would bond, because one, it would make the 15 months go a lot quicker if everybody was friendly and got along. But also for the film, I knew that, you know, having the hobbits sort of feeling like they really were connecting was something that was important for the movie.
So I didn't know anyone, and there's always that fear of going to a new place in uncharted territory.
I was there for best part of a year. So it was my life for a year, totally away from home, just making new friends.
It's such an adventure. You don't know who anyone is. Everybody's trying to find their feet and interact and try and be sociable. And that was one of the great things, that these friendships formed with the unlikeliest of people.
It was a real kind of Boy Scout kind of, year and a half. It was men together. I mean, you know, every so often Liv would be there and Kate Blanchett would be there, which was such an amazing thing, because you've got these two gorgeous women who got so much attention from us guys because, you know, we adored them so much.
Well, I remember being really nervous because I felt like a lot of the emphasis, because it was all the boys, was on them meeting me in a way, and I was so nervous to meet them. And when I think about how I saw them, it's completely different to how I see them now, but they're all so cute.
And it was this amazing kind of coming together. Here we are, we're all finally here, or almost all of us, and we're gonna set out on this journey. And it was this incredible excitement and anticipation for what we were about to do together.
One of the amazing things about Elijah, I think, is he can sleep anywhere at any time. I mean, I've seen him do it. And, like, if they don't go back to him for, like, 15 minutes, he'll just be sitting there like that, like, for 15 minutes. And then someone will go, "Elijah, yeah, yep, scene, right." And he goes. It's an incredible thing that he's got. I mean, he must have been so tired during that shoot, because, you know, there was times when we had time off. Elijah pretty much had no time off, ever.
I've seen him fall down 3 sets of staircases, like, and then just get up and go, and just walk off. That is an incredible gift, man. He's like, you know, like Chaplin.
I sort of appointed myself as his kind of minder. You know, I wanted to look after him and make sure that he was okay.
Sean was very much Sam for me, you know, always looking after me, being there for me.
He kept locking his keys in his apartment, and he'd leave and he couldn't get back in. And I was like, well, don't worry, I'll take care of it. And I would arrange, you know, to have a locksmith brought out there and you know, get his keys. And so he could continue going about having whatever fun he was having, you know, or talking to who he was talking to. And 45 minutes later, I bring him his keys, and Elijah, here's your keys. And he was like, oh, wow, great, thanks, you know, thanks for taking care of it. I saw the need for life to imitate art. Sam needed to look after Frodo as his sort of primary identity. As the Fellowship started to coalesce, that was the job I carved out for myself.
Sean Astin is just a very cool man. He had a different experience than the rest of us hobbits, because he's got a family, of course. He was there with his wife Christine and his beautiful daughter Ali, who we were all uncles to her at the end, you know.
Sean is a very kind of untrusting individual when it comes to safety. He's gonna hate me for saying this, but it's true. He always had to check out everybody else's job and make sure that they were doing their job properly, because he didn't necessarily trust that they had it all under control. And there was one such instance when we were in a helicopter and we were in a kind of treacherous mountain area. It wasn't easy to land and it wasn't easy to take off.
Elijah, Billy, and I were just having so much fun because we were in helicopters, and we were saying to the guy, could you try and flip over, or could you do some banks, or, how close could you get to that mountain? And, if we put a bike down, could you pick it up by its wheels and all that kind of stuff?
And they're talking and laughing and scratching, and I can see that, like, all 3 helicopters are making their way in, and ours is the first one to go, or second one to go. And I'm like, you guys, shut up. They're talking. They're like, Sean, and they know what they're doing. They're safe. And I'm like, oh, man, this is not good.
And Sean immediately starts, like, drilling the pilot of the helicopter. Like, all right, do you know that you've got, like, 2 guys behind you waiting to come in? Are you cool to, like, take off? And asking him all of these kind of safety questions that I'm sure this pilot had completely under control.
And there was also a point where Elijah and I and Billy and Sean had been dropped off at lower altitude, and we were there for about half an hour waiting for a helicopter to pick us up. And we were throwing stones at trees and running around and, having fun. And Sean was about 100 yards away from us, and he was directing helicopters into land.
You got 2 behind you.
Hey, Bon. Come on in.
Waving to the helicopter guy, pointing out where the other guys were, and they're waving at me, and the hobbits were all making fun of me because I was, like, trying to be Mr., involved.
Billy Boyd's a unique guy. I'm so just blessed to have met him,
Dom's an idiot.
No, Dom's great.
I was probably closest with Dom because, we had so much stuff together.
Done and done.
I was involved in a close near-death experience, really. It was kind of traumatic. We were filming this scene where the hobbits run to the Brandywine Bridge and get on the ferry. We were rehearsing, running very fast as we could down this wooden bridge, and then jumping onto the ferry.
And then in one of the times, as we ran down to get to the ferry, Dom got a wooden splinter through his foot.
An amazingly tough splinter, I think probably made of titanium.
You think somebody cut his leg off? The sweat was pouring off him.
Like every time I put pressure on my foot, it was just an excruciating pain, like going up my foot.
I thought he was going to pass out at one point, and everybody thought it was something really, really kind of serious.
And I was saying to all the boys, I was saying to Elijah and Sean and Billy, I said, you've got to come over and see them take this splinter out, because it's going to be a whopper, It's going to be like this big, and I'm going to get it framed.
And they take out this tiny splinter, and I was like, I cannot believe you made that fuss over that splinter.
I kept the splinter, still got it.
So after that, whenever, like, Dom did something, he'd start sweating. If anything happened, is it a splinter? Are you okay? And he'd be like, "Rrr."
We had a hiccup in the casting process because another actor had been cast in the role of Aragorn, and we just came to a realization that we had cast the role a little too young. It caused us a lot of headaches because we were now shooting the film, we couldn't stop shooting it, and we only had a very limited number of days that we could shoot without the character of Aragorn.
I got a phone call at home saying, do you want to get on a plane tomorrow to go to New Zealand? And I said, for what? And then they said, the Lord of the Rings.
I knew that this was a very, very important conversation, that he'd never met me before, he didn't know who I was, I'd never met him, he'd never been to New Zealand before, he hadn't read the Lord of the Rings.
I just said, well, can I think about it for a minute? He said, well, not very long, but you have till this afternoon.
And we somehow had to try to persuade him to take this role because we thought he would be really great, and we badly wanted him now in this movie. We were in a real bind.
And I hung up the phone, and my son was with me there. He says, what was that about? Was that Lord of the Rings? I said, yeah, they're making a movie out of it. And he knew the story. You know, I didn't.
And I know that the person we really have to thank for persuading Viggo was his son, Henry. Because Henry was about, I think he was about 11 or 12 years old at that time, and he was a huge fan of The Lord of the Rings, and absolutely was beside himself when he thought that his dad could get to play Aragorn.
So it was nice to have his blessing, you know what I mean?
Most times that you're with Viggo, something amazing is not too far behind. He's like an old-fashioned movie star in my eyes, you know, very gentlemanly and very polite and, you know, very concentrated in his art. You know, in a word, I would describe Viggo as being very inspiring.
Being the natural leader of this group of actors in the Fellowship came very easily to him.
Well, he was always doing things like, you know, like he'd get all the Kieran, you know, and pretend to throw him over the edge of the mountain.
You can see the wildness in his eyes. He goes slightly mental. Something kind of clicks.
And then he just rugby tackled me for some reason, you know, really, like, bang. God, I wondered what had hit me, you know, and what are you doing, you know? He's an extraordinary guy, really. I mean, he believes in the truth in everything he does, I think, you know, no matter what it is. And if he doesn't do it.
He's an incredible artist in so many different forms.
Photography and painting and poetry, and he just lives for the moment, it seems. He lives for life.
Viggo is an incredible photographer, and he took a lot of photographs throughout the whole time. And, you know, you sit at your little makeup station and there's a mirror in front of you, and he just, from the beginning, day one, started to, you know, make a collage all around the outsides of the mirror. And by the end of the shoot, there was no mirror left.
They were overlapping. It was full of pictures, and then it became another layer and another layer.
It's all the way up on the ceiling and wrapping around behind and trickling onto our mirrors. And he was thinking of, like, you know, buying the bus and taking it with him, because it was such a brilliant collage of memories and moments.
He doesn't just act the character. He has to somehow become part of the character. He and the character have to blend. And Viggo, I think, saw his sword as being the key into his character. And as a result, he didn't really want to go anywhere without his sword. I know there were restaurants he'd go and eat in at the end of a day shooting, where he'd carry his sword and he'd put it by the table as he was eating. He wouldn't drive anywhere in his car without the sword being in the back seat.
I was on the way out of a Sunday rehearsal. When I was walking out of the gym, all sort of sweaty, half in street clothes and half in Aragorn clothes, you know, waving the sword around, trying to keep a mental picture of what we'd just done, sort of, I guess, walking down the street, down to where my car was parked on a Sunday afternoon. Waving the sword around and looking like, you know, this sort of desperate Rasputin character to them, probably. Cop cars conversed on me. There'd been some report.
The interesting mix that John put on the thing was that he's not a big fan of rehearsing too much for fight scenes. And his method would be to say to the stunt guys, "How many of you are coming towards me?" And they'd say, 6. And he'd say, "Okay, who's first?" And the guy would go, "I'm first." And he'd go, "Okay, you come at me and I'll hit you with my axe, and then you come and I'll hit you, and you come and he would just take these guys out. And the stunt guys would, you know, tough guys, big tough guys, they'd wear a lot of armor. And they'd say, "Okay, John, try and miss us, but if you do hit us, it's not a problem, we don't mind." He would hit every single one of them. Someone would come at him and he'd just bang, bang, bang. And the stuff that they got of John fighting is brilliant, because it's real. You know, the stunt guys are absolutely terrifying. They're just running away from this guy. As you can see, the shots that you're getting are incredible. You know, he just looks on fire, but that is because John was wearing a prosthetic that limited his vision to this, because he had, you know, prosthetic skin, and his eyes were swollen because he was allergic to the prosthetic, so they were slightly shut. And he had no kind of, you know, sideway vision.
I mean, at times you just wanted to rip the damn stuff off and just scratch. Added to which I developed this topical eczema, which meant that basically every time the upper and lower eyelids were attached, I lost all the skin in this area. It was like a skin peel. And within hours then it would swell, and it would turn sort of lobster pink, and then, it would just be covered with lymph. And it was itchy and painful, and one felt very, very self-conscious.
John Rhys Davies took us to a restaurant, and it was when we'd only just started to get to know John, and we sat down at this huge long table, and he said, "I think I will order the food for tonight." And we said, "Oh, okay, on you go, John," and we were all having a conversation, and the waitress came over, and John ordered, food that would probably have fed maybe 35, 40 people, and there were about 12 of us. He just said, "We'll have 9 lobster and 15 shrimp and 12 red snapper, 15 filet mignons and some grilled mushrooms. I'll have 12 onions and wild boar and, all this kind of stuff, just like pheasants and grouse. And do you have partridge? Bring the partridge," all that kind of stuff. And, the brilliant thing about John is that because he's worked with so many amazing people and worked on some great jobs, all you need to do is give him the merest hint that you would like to hear something about a job that he'd done, and he's off.
One of the training regimes that we set up for our actors when they first arrived in New Zealand was boat handling skills, and I think that most of their training revolved around trying to make each other sink.
It grieves me to talk about this because in a boat situation when there is an elf and there is a dwarf in a training boat and the boat capsizes, let us say that the blame was placed on the dwarf.
He's a huge guy, man. He's 3 times the size of me, and his weight was just like, he just needed to a tiny little moment of the weight, and we were lost.
But there might just have been an element of grim satisfaction in the dwarf's face when he heard of another boating accident which also involved the elf.
I can't believe that John would say that was my fault. Did he really say it was my fault? He's unbelievable, man.
I wasn't very good at the canoes, really. I mean, I could never sort of get that sense to put it over that way, to do a left and all that lot. And I just kept getting lost and having to be towed back in. And Orlando was quite good. He'd practiced a lot more than I had. And he was like, sort of, very graceful. And so any time I could give his canoe a little knock with my oar, I would do, So he's been sent round the wrong way. And it'd say action, he's like, "God, it's Bean, he's put my boat in the wrong direction."
I love Orly. I mean, I would pick on him a lot just because I could. I had this thing I refused to drive when we were there because it was on the left side and I'm a little dyslexic and I was just terrified. So Orlando lived really close to me and I would make him drive me around everywhere. And we would spend a lot of time together. And I guess I wanted to watch over him and, it was his first movie and that could really mess with some people's heads, going from being a student in film school to being one of the stars of such an enormous film. And so I always took a lot of notice of just what he was doing and not how he was acting or anything, but in his personal life.
Orlando was no more selfish than any of us, but he wasn't always as clever at disguising it as the rest of us, because he's not that experienced, so that if he wanted something, he sort of came out and asked for it. Wiser birds go round the corner and whisper and sidle and to achieve the same effect. So sometimes the old lion had to push down the young cub, but not really, only in fun, because he's such an open guy, and his enthusiasm was so shared by us all.
He's a lively guy, and he's a really good guy, got a good heart. And but we're very different in some ways. I'm from up north, he's from down south, and I call him a southern softy, and he calls me a northern bastard.
Sean Bean, he was a real brother in arms, story-wise, but also actor to actor and man to man. He was a most valuable ally to me.
We were doing the sort of scene where I die, and Viggo's laid over me, and talking to me. And we sort of did all my shots before lunch, and then we just said like this, all right, that's lunch. We come back to the death scene later. And then we came back after lunch and shot this, all the coverage on Vigo. So it was quite strange that, because you still, you just break off and have some potatoes and some food and stuff like that, and you go back for your death scene again and die again.
Ian McKellen, when Ian arrived in New Zealand, I showed him a videotape I had with some interviews with Tolkien, and then obviously he got some of those audio tapes that you can get. And Ian based his performance of Gandalf on Tolkien. I mean, he was impersonating Tolkien.
It was looking at myself in the mirror as Gandalf, adjusting the stoop of the shoulders, and in doing that, feeling the voice deepen and getting raspier and a little more precise than perhaps my own is.
And really, in a sense, Tolkien does have, he does have a part in our movie, interpreted through Ian McKellen's performance of Gandalf. Ian
shared our trailer. So if you can imagine the 4 hobbits in a trailer with Ian McKellen.
I was sort of partitioned off. I don't know why. Perhaps it was thought that Gandalf wouldn't want to talk to lesser beings.
There was an entrance at this end of the bus and an entrance at that end of the bus. And when Ian was in the chair, we always used the other entrance out of respect.
But I was rather grateful of having a rather, albeit flimsy, partition, because Elijah Wood in particular, and Dominic Monaghan liked to play music quite loudly early in the morning, and it wasn't always music that was to my taste.
So that became kind of difficult. You'd kind of hear him sort of in the back of the trailer at one point, just in protesting and some sort of, you can't really figure out what he's saying, but just protesting.
But there was no tension because of it.
He's a very amusing man. Great sense of humour, and a very nice man. It's an awful phrase, really, to say that somebody's nice. But when I say nice, I mean he's a very decent person. He's a very fine actor, and he was tremendously supportive, as far as I was concerned, encouraging and a constant companion, you might say.
It's my first opportunity to play with Ian McKellen, whom I've met, but I've never actually worked. I mean, people automatically assume that, you know everybody in Britain. But we've never worked together. And that has been a tremendous joy for me, because he's the most generous of actors. And he works in a way that I like, which is a sort of ensemble way of thinking. In other words, he's not frightened of suggesting things to me and vice versa. And that way, we can combine and work out a scene together.
Ian is a master actor. He has a technique or an approach to film acting which hadn't occurred to me before, in that each time he spoke the lines, it was a slightly different Bilbo that I was working with and reacting to. Because Ian's approach is to willfully make each take different. And so he provided what he called a kaleidoscope of Bilbo for Peter Jackson to eventually look through and shake into whatever configuration he wanted.
One of the great things about Christopher Lee is that he is a huge Tolkien fan. Probably one of the biggest Tolkien fans that I've ever met. He's read Lord of the Rings every year. He reads it once a year and has done so for decades. He actually met Professor Tolkien once. I never had to really talk to him about who and what Saruman was. He just absolutely knows his character inside out, and said to me something very sweet, that it was fulfilling a lifelong ambition of his to be involved in a film of Lord of the Rings, because he has been reading it for so long and waiting for the day that a film would be made, and dreaming that he might possibly be involved in it.
I think I've always rather underestimated Christopher Lee because of the films that he's made, and he'd be the first to say that not all of them are of the highest quality. I certainly haven't seen them all. It's more than 200, isn't it? But I have always been impressed by his physical and vocal authority, and I think he was very well cast.
Meeting Christopher Lee and watching him work on this character was a wonderful experience for me. I mean, I went on, I didn't have days off, but I would run from my set to watch what he was doing sometimes. having to come in and do Saruman and like go 0 to 60 now, boom, and you get a quarter mile and that's all you get, and you better make us believe it. He knows so much about these stories, about this book, and cares so much about it that he is like an emissary, you know, from the mists, like the ghost of Tolkien on the set.
The famous phrase, Ashnas Gurbatuluk, Ashnas Grimpatul, Ashnas Rakatuluk, Akburzanishi Kimpatul. One ring to rule them all.
I think Liv Tyler said, this is just the weirdest set in the world, because, you know, there's monsters walking around and wizards, and also, you know, very small people and very tall people, and it was quite a weird thing at first, I suppose, but it became natural, you know, it was your place of work.
I kind of feel bad for Liv, because, you know, her character was such that she wasn't required all the time, and she would come to New Zealand for kind of stints. So she was sort of left out to a certain degree of the kind of camaraderie that we were able to gain and the experiences that we were able to gain as a fellowship, because we were there for basically the entire length of time.
She became our princess. We looked out for her, you know. It was like, it was a boys' movie, and she came in and sort of gave us that element, that female touch, and it was great to have her around.
Someone like Cate Blanchett or Liv Tyler would show up. It's a different quality, a different energy would come to the set, and it affected the way people behaved on the set and the way people acted.
And it was wonderful working with Cate. The image that I most had in mind when I prepared for that scene is when I actually met Julie Christie, possibly the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And it was that impact that I really wanted to try and convey in this scene with Gimli and the Enchantress herself. And it was very easy to do that with Cate, because Kate's got her own beauty and luminous quality herself.
I was really looking forward to working with her, because apart from Lothlorien, I don't really have scenes with her, and that was a scene where we got to speak Elvish together, and it felt really effortless because she was so involved in it and so fluent with the language that it just it transports me when I see it, and it did at the time.
Having actors like Cate Blanchett and Liv Tyler and Hugo Weaving are able and have the power to portray non-humans ethereal. They have an elegance and a beauty.
Hugo's an actor very much like myself, and so we were both of us rather enjoyably out of our normal milieu, and a lot of our off-screen conversation was about being a theatre actor and plays that we'd done or wanted to do. A very congenial, like-minded person who has a wonderful sense of humour, and there's a lot of laughter around when Hugo's there.
Hugo just sort of assumed that role of Elrond with the greatest of ease, you know. I mean, there was I putting all this kind of legwork into creating the character, and I think he just breezed in and made him, you know, he had all the authority of Elrond.
One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie.
We had these scale doubles on the movie that were short people to represent the hobbits for the wide shots.
It's Kieran's birthday, what was it, on Tuesday?
Tuesday,
On
yeah.
Tuesday, it was Kieran's birthday. Look at the chiseled, the etched, the years of experience found on Kieran's face. And later you'll be able to see him wearing all of our faces.
Kieran was the lord of the scale doubles.
The sergeant, you know, the ringleader, the disciplinarian, and he ran a very tight ship.
Kieran, I hear they're going to set you on fire. How do you feel about that?
If it happens, I'll be really happy to do it.
And the person who doubled for me was a girl from Thailand called Fawn, who's just absolutely beautiful. We got on so well. She was talking about wanting to become a stunt woman because she loved all that stuff, except for horses. She hated being on the horse.
This is the best double, right? This is perfect. It's pretty close.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah.
I was a young 12-year-old boy at the time, and I think they chose him because Martin had this kind of twitchy, kind of nervous energy that I think Merry seemed to have at the start of the movie. He picked it up very quickly and you know, really put a lot into the movie in terms of his physicality. We had to have a very intimate relationship with these people. They had to become us in miniature form, you know.
We had a double for Gimli named Brett, who did all of Gimli's scale work and a lot of his stunt work as well.
4'9.5". Also, I'm a black belt in the martial art.
He already had some problems with his knees, and he really injured himself badly, but just kept going. And anytime you were tired, you know, all you had to do was look at him and what he was accomplishing. He was definitely an inspiration.
Sean Astin's scale double, an Indian guy called BK, speaks with a very strong Indian accent. Kind of talks like that. Hello, how are you doing today? Nice to see you.
He loves red wine and loves chess.
You like red? I've got red wine. Yes, man.
Fantastic. And he would play. He's awesome at chess.
So he'd be dressed as Sam with a mask of my face. So it was like I was playing a miniature version of myself who was better than me at chess.
Him and Sean would go at it. He'd kick Sean's ass every time. Sean fancied himself a chess player. He'd kick his ass.
I'd take his bishop, and then he'd come and he'd try to take my king, and I'd take his king, and he'd run around and laugh and stuff.
Him and Viggo were an amazing team together. They were very funny and they got on very well.
Sandu Suraj na dekh. He can't see the sun and moon.
It was very interesting to see BK shouting at Viggo, you know, get in car, and Viggo go, oh, very sorry, get in the car. And, you know, it was like a mother-hen kind of relationship. Brilliant. And this day we went fishing, and he caught a fish and ran in and said, there's a load of salmon and they're all feeding around the shore, so just throw your rod in and you should catch a fish in a couple of minutes. We went back that night and Viggo said, I'm going to cook the fish tonight. And I went into the kitchen and BK's screaming at him, screaming orders, you know, open oven and cook rice and get colander and bring me knife and bring me fork. Viggo's running around going, okay, all right, you know, getting in trouble.
And we sit down, and we've had to clean up his mess and prepare the fish. And we're complimenting him, and rightly so, on this excellent curry. And you know, and he's saying, I know. Yes, it was quite good. And like that. And then I said, what do you think of the fish? And he says, it's okay. You know, like... And then I said, well, you don't like it? And he says, it's not how I would have made it. And I said, well, how would you have made it? I would have made fish curry. I said, well, of course.
We lived, you know, most of it, not together, but we lived in the same city for 15, 16 months, traveling together, late nights together, long hours together, cold weather, everything, all of these elements. And we were doing it together as a force. And in that way, the fellowship became a reality.
And it just completely changed who I was as a person and where I was going, you know? And simply for that fact alone, it's been the most rewarding thing that's happened in my life.
You get to, you know, see and touch and smell and feel the energy of at least 100 people, but more like 800 people over the course of 15 months in a way that, you know, in most of human life, you don't have that kind of closeness with people.
You know, people got crabby, there were bad days and stuff for everybody and bad periods, but there was always a kind of a support system, you know? Mostly unspoken, it was just there.
Lifelong friends. There's not one member of the fellowship that I don't think I'll know for the rest of my life.
Those friendships that are so important to the story as well were a reality, and a reality because of what we had to go through together.